So welcome to this evening's webinar, everyone, which is organised by the Girls on Track UK initiative, which is managed by Motorsport UK. Thank you so much for joining us. It is great to see so many of you here. Before we do get into the session and introduce our fabulous guests for this evening, there are a couple of bits of housekeeping just to let you know about. So the first thing is that this webinar is being recorded and it will be made available after the event on the Girls on Track UK community Facebook page, and it'll also be on the Motorsport UK YouTube channel, where you can actually also view all past webinars as well. So apart from us three panelists, all participants are restricted from speaking, but please do use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen to ask any questions during the session. We have got some of them that have been pre-submitted, but if you think of any as we go, then pop them in there and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can in the time that we do have tonight. So without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce our fabulous guest for this evening. So our first guest is Katy Bell, who is a power unit confirmation engineer at Mercedes High Performance Powertrain. And we have actually had a last minute change. Unfortunately, Margot was unable to attend tonight. So very kindly, Juliet Summerfield has stepped in for us, and Juliet is a program manager at Mercedes as well. Thank you so much for joining us, ladies. I hope that we can have a good chat tonight. So just to start off, can you both just give us a bit of an idea of what your job is and what it entails? Juliet, if we start with you, if that's okay.
Yeah, so I'm the program manager for Future for here at Mercedes. That sounds quite complicated, but basically I'm responsible for making sure that we get to go racing with the best hardware that we can in the time and the budget available. So I started off as an engineer, but I've now dropped into sort of more of a steering role where I help some of the chief engineers make decisions and make sure that we're going in the right direction.
Oh, brilliant, perfect. And Katy?
Hi everyone, my name's Katy. I'm a power unit confirmation engineer. So I am basically testing the engines when they've first been put together. So we run them on the dyno and do the first set of testing on each engine that you will see running on track.
Brilliant. They both sound like extremely interesting jobs. So I hope we get to learn lots more about it. So let's start right back at the beginning. What got both of you interested in the motorsports in the first place? Katy, do you want to go first this time?
Yeah, so I think for me that's quite an easy one. So I grew up in a very sort of like sciencey engineering household. My mum's a pilot and my dad actually also works in Formula One. He was an aerodynamicist. So for me it was always kind of quite, I guess, obvious. I sort of grew up always watching Formula One and being interested in sort of all things engineering, planes, cars, that sort of thing. And then I think naturally I was quite lucky that I was interested in sort of science and maths, and that played to my strengths. So I kind of felt like it was a bit of a natural route for me. And I didn't really end up looking in other avenues apart from engineering. And that's how I'm here, I guess.
Oh, great. So it was something that was sort of always set from the start for you.
Yeah, definitely. I don't remember like being younger and ever thinking, oh, I'm gonna try architecture or anything like that. I just always sort of knew that I wanted to get into Formula One.
Oh, brilliant. Perfect. And what about you, Juliet?
Yeah, so kind of a similar story, really. I think I've always sort of, as Katy has said that she was, I've always sort of been very much a hands-on sort of person, very maths and science orientated. My dad is an engineer, electrical engineer, but the rest of my family definitely aren't engineers. So I've sort of taken a break away from the rest of the family who all work in healthcare. But sort of very car related again when I was little, but I think it was probably about the age of 7. I used to watch, I think it was Mika Hakkinen on TV and F1, and it was like I saw it as just this rock star job that nobody ever got, and somebody pointed out to me that that was a real job that I could have, and it was like, right, that's it, that's where I'm going. So from about that age, that's where I've pushed to be.
Oh, brilliant. That's so lovely. So sort of carrying on then, after you sort of knew what you wanted to do, you both went to university to get your respective jobs, and I think you actually both studied engineering as well. So just tell us a little bit about what you did at university, where you went and how you found it. Juliet, do you want to go first this time?
Yeah, so I did a master's degree in engineering, in automotive engineering, and I went to Loughborough University. I did a year in industry during that time as well, so it was 5 years at university, which sounds like a really long time. But it actually flew by. I sort of chose Loughborough because of sort of knowing that it was a good engineering university, but also that it was a university that I really wanted to spend 5 years of my life there for. Loughborough's got a lot of sport going on, and I loved my dancing, so it made sense to sort of go somewhere that I would really enjoy. So yeah, it was a little bit far from home, but it was definitely the right decision in the end. I really enjoyed Loughborough.
Oh, brilliant. And Katy?
So I went to Sheffield. I did aerospace engineering, and I know that's maybe slightly different to some people doing aerospace, but I chose it because I found it really interesting. And I did that for 3 years. I did the BEng, so it was just a bachelor's, and then I was a little bit conscious that perhaps maybe I wanted to try and specialize a bit more into automotive, motorsport, that sort of thing. So I then moved after my degree, and I did a master's in Leeds, and I did it in automotive engineering. I didn't do a placement year. To be honest, I don't think there was like a rhyme or reason for why I didn't. I think I was just really enjoying being at uni, and I didn't really want to kind of put that on hold. But I was conscious that sort of like everyone else might be coming in with a placement. So I kind of substituted in with my summer holidays. I did a couple of summer long, like 3 month sort of placements. And then I did a part-time placement in my master's year. So I kind of like topped up a different way. So I was 4 years. But I did enjoy definitely being able to split between 2 unis, because I got to see how everything else, how different ones worked. And it was quite interesting being able to study aerospace and automotive. So it kind of, I felt like gave me a few different perspectives on things.
Brilliant, perfect. They both sound like really interesting courses, to be fair. And they're quite different, but essentially you both kind of come to a similar position at the end of it, which is great to see that there's sort of like multiple options. So one thing that was sort of quite interesting, obviously being a woman choosing to study engineering at university and for a master's, did it ever put you off thinking it was going to be quite a male dominated course, that you potentially could be like, you know, one of only a couple females on the course? And did it ever put you off at all, or did it just not really cross your mind?
I was trying to think about this prior to tonight, and I don't really ever remember thinking about it. And I don't know if it's the same sort of now going through schools, and if Juliet found this, but even as early as sort of A levels, when you're narrowing down your selection, I did find that by the time it got to choosing A levels and doing like your sort of math sciences, I did maths, physics, economics and art. So the maths and physics, there wasn't many girls in that either. It was probably sort of like maybe 20%. So I didn't go to uni. I didn't think about it at all. I just sort of got there and was like, well, there's not as many girls as boys, but I don't know, it just never crossed my mind, and it didn't really affect my decision, or it just sort of it was what it was, because it had slowly been like narrowing down from sort of like GCSE age anyway. And Juliet?
I think mine was completely different actually. So I went from an all-girls high school to an engineering degree where there was, I think there was six women on the course, which was a bit of a shock. I was certainly a shock going from sort of an all-girls environment to an all-male environment. I had quite a lot of people try and put me off my course. It wasn't necessarily me who felt that way, but certainly going through school and even just speaking to family, friends and friends, everybody sort of questioned on, you know, there's not going to be many women there, and are you sure you're going to be okay with that? And hopefully things have changed a little bit since I was going through my A levels. But it was quite a surprise to me that going through high school at an all girls school, I was always put on that I could do anything. I could do anything. I could be anyone. which I think helped a lot in terms of going then into an engineering degree.
Yeah.
But then suddenly, right at the end, sort of, I just came saying sort of sixth form, choosing my A levels, it was suddenly, are you sure you want to do automotive engineering? Are you absolutely sure you want to be that person? You know, do you not want to do something a bit more feminine, like civil engineering, which was strange to me. But so yeah, so within myself, I never questioned it, but it was a surprise to see how many people did ask me about it.
That's really interesting, actually, to see sort of you both sort of experienced sort of the different sides of probably what you could get, really. But it's nice to see that sort of despite that, you both still managed to work in it anyway, which is brilliant. So let's talk a little bit about that then. So how did you get into working for Mercedes, or if Mercedes wasn't your first job in motorsport, in engineering and F1, how did you sort of go from university to the workplace? Did you do a placement? Did you do work experience or an internship? I know, Katie, you've mentioned you did a couple of placements sort of in your summer holidays. So do you want to chat a little more about that? And did they help?
Yeah, so where did I start? So I think sort of GCSE age, I was very lucky. I got to do a week's work experience at Mercedes, but MGP, so chassis side. I'm trying to think about how I got that. So I lived quite locally, and I think sort of for work experience ages, definitely at that time, but I don't know if it's still sort of the case, but teams sort of, if you were sort of local and interested, they did offer weeks work experiences if you sort of got in touch, managed to get hold of someone's email, that sort of thing. So I just did a week's work experience. It wasn't anything crazy. Like, I was quite young, so it wasn't hands-on, but I got a good sort of look around, got to see all the different departments. That was really interesting. And that was sort of like a foot in the door and a bit of a contact. So that was maybe age like 16ish, and then went off, did my A levels, went to uni, and then in my first year I did a summer placement up in Sheffield at a place called the AMRC, which is nothing to do, well, my placement wasn't anything to do with motorsport, Formula One, but it was just sort of a general like engineering CAD based sort of internship, and they did lots of different research projects. So I did that. It was really helpful to like get some experience, but I think coming off doing just your first year of uni, there's only so much you've learned in that year, so I wasn't doing loads of helpful things. So off the back of that, I was like, okay, let's try again next year or the year after. So I got back in touch with whoever I'd been in touch with for my week's work experience when I was younger, and I was like, do you do summer placements back at Mercedes? And they said yes. So I managed to go and do I think it was about 3 months, so my whole sort of summer in between, I think like second and third year, I did a placement with them, and it was getting a bit more hands-on and a bit more helpful. It was, I think I did it in their, it was called technology and engineering at the time, so it was in their customer wind tunnel. So it wasn't directly Formula One, but it was based in a factory, and they basically rent sort of time for customers to buy in their second wind tunnel, which doesn't run Formula One things. So I did that, and then again, it was sort of like I'd made a bit of a contact, like got a few emails, that sort of thing. And then it came to the end of my degree, and I was sort of starting to choose where to go for my master's and like looking at courses. So I decided on Leeds, and then I just completely off a whim thought, well, if you don't ask, you don't get. So I emailed back my old manager, and I was like, oh, you don't by any chance do any form of like sponsorship or just anything? Could I do my like thesis project for you guys, anything like that? Thinking that they'd probably say no, because I thought, well, how much help can I be to them? Anyways, they got back and they said yes, like we'll try and come up with something. So I ended up doing like, it was kind of like a partial placement with them, so worked sort of part-time, and my role was for my thesis project for my master's, I did the research bit for the team. So it was still in the customer wind tunnel, and I did a little project for them alongside my degree. So that was sort of what I did to substitute not doing an industrial placement, but sort of just led on from doing a week's work experience, getting an email, keeping in touch, like, making a few friends, a few like work colleagues that I could sort of like keep chipping away at, and you just sort of, I don't know, the ball sort of kept rolling, and I just kept pushing and kept knocking on the door and asking, like, please, can you help me in any way? I'm really keen. I want to pick up experience. And the whole experience I found amazing. Like, everyone was so willing to help, so kind. They went out their way to sort of like help me gain experience, because I think everyone's been at that stage where they're sort of at the school uni age and they feel quite lost, and they feel like, oh God, how the hell do I get into this? And so people are willing to like help you. You just sort of have to be the first step and put yourself out there and ask. So that was my sort of first experience.
Brilliant. I mean, that sounds amazing. Juliet, did you want to answer this one as well?
Yeah, so I didn't really get to do any of the work experience things or the placements when I was younger. I'm from sort of the northwest of the UK, and there wasn't a great deal of engineering around me, especially not sort of the automotive side of things. I think when I was doing sort of my GCSEs and did my 2 weeks of work experience, I think I did it at Reebok for 2 weeks in sort of part of their processing planning sort of department, which again wasn't really where I wanted to end up. And I think that's just sort of showed me that I didn't want to be there, and that engineering was definitely what, you know, the career that I wanted to focus on. I guess then my first sort of big work experience with an engineering company wasn't until my placement year at university. So I did my first 2 years at university, and then I did a placement year. It wasn't in motorsport, it was at Toyota. I was a quality engineer, mass production quality, which again taught me an awful lot about how a business runs. Toyota have got some really interesting practices and processes as well. So that taught me an awful lot about just the engineering world and manufacturing and lead times and things like that I've ended up then calling on later on down the line. But then it wasn't sort of until I graduated that I then sort of kept looking for those jobs. I think, unfortunately, during my placement year, it was sort of 2008, 2009, and that's when there was sort of a bit of an economic downturn. People weren't really taking on placements, especially in the summer and things like that. People just weren't that interested, weren't really replying to those emails and phone calls that you were making off the bat, unfortunately. But graduated, I still knew that I wanted to go into F1, but I thought my idea was I was going to sort of take a bit of time out after university. 5 years was a long time to be focused on that, and I was sort of going to take 12 months out, and then I was going to go around and start applying for grad jobs at that point. But instead, I sort of got the opportunity to do a summer. It was only meant to be a summer job, a tier 1, tier 2 automotive supplier, again doing quality mass production engineering, and that was on sort of seat pans and window regulators. Again, absolutely nothing to do with F1 and racing. But again, it sort of gave me the opportunity to step into a real world engineering, completely different again to what I'd done for my placement year. And that they then sort of offered me a longer term job off the back of that. But during that time, I was sort of gathering some money. I wanted to do a bit of traveling, so wasn't necessarily that keen on continuing. But again, out of the blue, I was looking for grad jobs to apply for in full graduate schemes, as opposed to sort of the job that I was doing, because I knew, again, I wanted to go towards Formula One. And I saw a job advert for a graduate placement here at HPP, and I applied off the bat, sort of hoping that I might hear something back off them. And I got a phone call, I think it was like January, I think I remember it's January the 1st. It's literally like the first day back at work.
Oh, wow.
And they said, we've seen you've applied for a graduate placement, but we see that you've actually graduated. Somebody's dropped out of a 12-month placement scheme, and we've got a vacancy. Would you be interested in interviewing for that position? And I was like, absolutely, I'd love to.
Of course.
And that was in the program management department here at HPP. Unfortunately, I had a telephone interview, was offered the job, and got to come and work here for a 6-month period. So it's sort of like January to sort of shut down, so sort of July, August time. And during that time, I was interviewed for their graduate placement scheme, and I was actually rejected. So I didn't get the job at the end of it. So I did those 6 months, and then I continued to look for a different grad job. But that was sort of my first touch in HPP, or sort of Formula One and motorsport, was sort of that 6 month placement, and that sort of definitely gave me the motorsport bug at that point. It was like, I definitely want to go back there. That's definitely the place that I want to work. And I was fortunate enough to get a grad job external at a proving ground in the south. Again, I ended up in the Powertrain department, and that's where I sort of started to become a test engineer and looking after chassis and engine dynos, so full cars and engine, just engines on dynos. And that's sort of where I continued on until sort of did my grad scheme there, and that was another 5 years of grad scheme, and then applied back here at HPP for a permanent position, and was lucky enough to get that back. So yeah, it's sort of a bit of a convoluted way through to get into motorsport. There's probably a lot of things that I'd do differently now if I had my time again, but I've learned an awful lot of different skills doing all of those different jobs, and seeing different areas of the automotive sector and the engineering sector. So yeah, I don't know whether I'd want something different, but yeah, it's certainly not quite the straightforward route.
Brilliant. That was actually so interesting to hear. Like, again, you've both had such different experiences, and they've actually had a question come in, and sort of building a little bit on what you said, Katie. Do you sort of agree with the idea that to get a job in F1, you have to have connections? And if so, how would you go about doing them? And actually, Katie, you mentioned that you sort of kept in touch with your work experience right from the beginning, and that was sort of how you kind of ended up getting that job. I mean, did you want to go first and sort of have an answer to this one?
Yeah, so I think it's a hard one, isn't it? It's like with any sort of like industry you're trying to enter, fashion, motorsport, whatever. Obviously, if you have a contact, that is beneficial, but I don't think there's ever anything stopping anyone who doesn't. So it's all about, I've found, sort of like taking the leap, sending the email, just spamming the inboxes and seeing what you get back. So for example, alongside this role, when I was on the graduate scheme, I wanted to gain a bit of extra experience sort of trackside at the lower levels. So I sent round emails to as many lower level teams as possible in sort of the GB3 championships. I think I emailed every team. I think I heard back from one or two, and just I said, is there any capacity that I could come and like shadow for a couple of race weekends? I want to get some more experience. I want to help my role here at HPP, which I would say I told HPP, and you know, it's more experience, so happy to do. And I eventually heard back from a few teams, and they were like, yeah, come and shadow for a weekend. We'll get to know you and go from there. And then I did that. I really enjoyed it. They, I guess, liked me because they had me back. And that was sort of a contact. And I think people are very willing to help if you're willing to sort of take the first step and like put yourself out there. You can get hold of emails very freely on the internet. You've got LinkedIn. Do not be afraid to throw yourself out there and try and get extra experience. And also, if Formula One's sort of the end goal, it doesn't mean you have to jump straight in with Formula One and be disheartened if you don't get it, because there's so many people that apply. And as Juliet said, it took her like a few years before she got the job that she's been in since. So, you know, you could try like the lower teams, gain some experience, and then just keep trying. And I think people will look at like your willingness and your attitude more than necessarily if you come out with a first or you know, got the best grades or what have you, because that only takes you so far. It's your attitude and like your willingness to learn. I'd say that's sort of my experience, and that would be my best advice, is just throw yourself out there and try and speak to as many people as you can.
And Juliet, I mean, did you want to come in on this one as well? Because obviously you had quite a different sort of experience and potentially didn't, you know, have all of the connections. So what would you say?
Yeah, definitely. So, I didn't have the connections, but I think it's important to know that the motorsport world is a very small place. I'm sure Katie will agree. There's a lot of people, lots of different places, but the automotive industry as a whole is also a very small place. So when I ended up coming to HPP, I found out that two of my previous people that I'd worked with, colleagues in the past from Toyota, had been here. So it was, they were already here. So again, it's quite a small world, and those connections can come from anywhere. It doesn't necessarily have to be somebody in F1. But again, I'm now thinking about, I'm putting my manager hat on. The people that I interview at the moment, and the people who are sort of on my undergrad scheme at the moment, they're not people who have got connections to F1. They're not people who already are known to us. They're just people who've applied, who've come through the normal process of interviews. So they've certainly not seen it. There's certainly no benefit on that side of things. Then moving forward into the grad jobs, certainly that's at the point where it can help having contact or having some experience, because lots of places, HPP included, sometimes looks to those people who've worked for them previously in terms of how they then judge your attitude and all of those things that you'd look for in a permanent position. But I certainly don't think that it's a critical requirement to have contacts already in F1.
Brilliant. So sort of bring this sort of section to a close, sort of about like uni and getting into the job. What would be each of yours best bit of advice for someone who's thinking about getting a job in engineering? Maybe they're at uni, maybe they're starting to think about uni, and like, what would you suggest that they aim for and try to do, sort of if they're at that stage where they've not got the job yet, but maybe they're thinking about studying in engineering, or they're thinking about applying for grad jobs?
I think from my side, I would always suggest to pick a degree and a university that you think you're going to enjoy. There's no point in going for the end goal. As I think, as myself and Katie said, we always wanted to work in F1, great. But, Katie chose aeronautical engineering over automotive because it was more interesting to her at the time. And that's absolutely fine. You've got to do what's right for you, and you've got to do something that you're really interested and passionate about, because otherwise you're not going to get very far, because you're going to be doing it because you think you have to be there, as opposed to the fact that you want to be there. So I would definitely look to make sure that you're doing the right things for you at the time. Yeah, I think so.
Katie, did you want to comment on this one as well? I know you kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier, but if you wanted to go into any more detail at all.
Yeah, I would say firstly, Juliet's absolutely right. Like, she couldn't have put it better, to be honest. And just sort of to add and build on that, I would say not to put too much pressure on yourself. I think when you're at university, it's very easy to get sort of wrapped up in it, and wrapped up in you have to get the best grades, you have to get a first in this module and all this, and that's not the case. And well, obviously you need to do well, but don't put too much pressure on yourself. Enjoy the process, and just because it doesn't happen first time, it doesn't mean that it won't happen. Like, your career's 30 odd years, so if you don't get in on the grad job or the placement, that's okay. It doesn't mean you won't get in the future. And like, definitely to just really enjoy university, and there's many different ways of sort of getting to the end point you want. Me and Juliet, for example, well, I don't know actually, Juliet, because you didn't say, but I've assumed, because you didn't mention it, you didn't do Formula Student?
Not really, no, I didn't. No,
I didn't either. And I feel like a lot of people, that's a really common question, is like, oh, did you do Formula Student? There's quite a big pressure that sort of that if you don't do it, you won't get in. And I just want to say, like, obviously it's great if you have, but I don't think there's sort of one avenue to get into a place. I personally felt like I didn't really have the time and the capacity to do it alongside studying, and I found it a lot studying at university. I was full on doing an engineering degree, and I enjoyed my other activities. I was on the equestrian club and stuff, and that's something I really enjoyed, and I didn't want to compromise on that. So you can find other ways of getting to places. So just sort of to say that, really.
Yeah, no, definitely. And sort of just to touch a little bit on what you've just said, when you were at university, how did you sort of manage your time, obviously with the academic courses and obviously getting extra experience as well? We've actually had a question come in about it. Was it difficult, or did it work quite easily? Because obviously I think you mentioned you did them in the summer, so
yeah,
I don't know who wants to go first on this.
Well, so I would say, because I did the summer placements, it was quite easy because they're quite separate. You finish sort of 9 months at uni and then you've got 3 months off. So in that sense, it was quite easy. In terms of like sort of scheduling when you're at uni, it is hard doing an engineering degree, because I found like some of my housemates would have sort of maybe like 4 to 5 to 6 hours of lectures a week, and like in your first year in engineering you're up at like 30-40 hours. So it is a bit tricky, but you do just make it work with everything that's thrown at you, I think. But don't be disheartened if you start a course and you're at that age and all your housemates have got less hours than you, and you know, engineering is hard, I guess, and that's the price we had to pay, but it's definitely worth it.
No, definitely. And Juliet, do you sort of have a similar experience with it being, you know, quite, you know, a big focus on your uni life?
As Katie was saying, engineering isn't an easy degree, and it's certainly not a short lectured degree. It's a lot of hours, and you need to put in a lot of work. And I don't think either of us are suggesting otherwise on that. And it is difficult to try and manage everything, and sometimes you do maybe think that you're missing out a little bit because somebody's got a reading week, or somebody else is going out every night, and you're up until 3 o'clock in the morning in a CAD lab trying to CAD up something for a last minute project. And I think that just sort of adds to the university experience, or it certainly did for me. I did do a lot of activity. I did do, I started karate. I kept up with my dancing. I did a bit of skiing, and I found sort of, I'm going to say, I found my group of friends. I found a good group of friends at the local motor club, motor society. So I wasn't doing Formula Student, but I was sort of around bits of broken car a lot, and that just made it easier. It made the end goal easier because you're enjoying it. Yes, there was an awful lot to do, and 9 till 6 p.m. You were sort of at university, and after that you were wedging in a few hours of social time and then carrying on. But I sort of tended to take the summers out. I didn't necessarily go for the work experience. I did go and do some work to sort of earn some cash while the summer was on, to sort of then put me through uni for the next semester. But I sort of took that time out of sort of my downtime, and to be able to go and see my friends and do more of the socialising and the things that I thought that maybe I wasn't quite seeing enough of during the term time.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it sounds like it's such a big commitment, but if you want to do it, you can make it work. So sort of, I know I've had a lot of questions coming about university stuff, and if we do have time, I will try and come back to them later, but I'm just very conscious of the time. So if we move on a little bit to talk about both of your roles now, so just to start off, sort of on the day-to-day, do you sort of have like a standard day in your job, or does it vary? I don't know if you want to go first on this one, Juliet.
So I definitely don't have a standard day. It's every single day in this job is different, which I think is why I enjoy it so much. My day starts with a meeting first thing, which is a very always a first 8 a.m. meeting, just to sort of set the priorities of the day. But then the rest of the day can literally be anything. I sometimes sit in the afternoon and sort of laugh at what kind of extremes I get to see. It might be that we're talking about a concept project, something really far in the future, that's going to take sort of months and years to develop, and then in the next statement you're talking about that you're missing a screw or a washer or an O-ring from build, and you're trying to help going around the supply chain, or to pull that in. But then you've also got some problems maybe that's going on in the factory. Somebody's running a part that's broken. Katie's been running something on the dyno and it's broken, and we're now all trying to fix it. We're trying to put a timing plan together for how quickly we can put that fix in place. And it can literally be that extreme, and it can change hour by hour, day by day. I always say that I start off with my to-do list, at 8, 8:30, I'll write my to-do list out, and then sort of by 5 o'clock when I'm sitting down back at my desk, and my to-do list for the day looked like that, yes, and realised I've done absolutely nothing on it whatsoever. Because it is that varied. I sit in meetings with the supply chain, I sit in meetings with the engineers, I put a lot of program plans and project plans together to sort of try and get us to certain places, and that can be, as I've said, long-term plans or short-term plans. If we've got a part that's broken or a part that we're short of, we can't get hold of, we've lost, putting a plan together around that in terms of how we're going to progress from that point forward can be quite an emergency perspective. But one of the good things about being in my department in program management is that I touch every department in the business. There's not a single thing that I don't really get involved with, and that's from finance, manufacturing, supply chain, engineering, design, test, and then all the way through to racing. At the moment, I'm looking more towards future things, but sort of in the since before sort of mid-year, I was putting race strategies together and what we were going racing with and servicing and what we were doing after events and things like that. So it is just a hugely varied day, and I wouldn't ever like to try and write down exactly what I did every day, because I'd either be a little bit scared about my to-do list or upset that I didn't get enough done. So.
Well, I mean, that does certainly sound like you could pretty much have anything thrown at you. Katie, what about you? Is yours similar?
Yeah, I would say very similarly to Juliet, and probably everyone at HPP. My day is very fluid and can change at a drop of a hat. So I'm mainly dyno based, so I do the testing of our power units, and that's sort of like the day-to-day role, but whether or not we're actually testing each day just very much depends on how the previous test went, if it's still having to carry on for whatever reason, if they've added on extra tests, or getting the next engine, is it running to the schedule that we hoped? As Juliet said, if something's not arrived in time or it's broken before it's got to us, then that can delay us, and we have to be very fluid with sort of shifting around what we're doing and what we're testing and when we're testing it. But I do definitely enjoy that aspect of it, because every day's different and it very much keeps you on your toes. So I think I'd be bored anywhere else, because I'm so used to it now.
Brilliant. Well, I mean, it definitely sounds like it keeps you both nice and busy. So what would you say is the best part of your job? I mean, it might be that it keeps you really, really busy. Which one either you want to go first?
Yeah, so I think probably the best bit about my job is that seeing the car on track. I think sort of February, March time, seeing the car sort of go on track for the first time into winter testing is always the best bit, because it's that big deep breath of, what does it look like? How is it performing? What, I've helped achieve that. It's that sort of sense of achievement and pride that you go, I did that. You might not be able to see anything on it, it's not got my name on it. I've not specifically designed anything on that car or tested anything on that engine, but I've been a part of that. I've helped get it there. I've helped get it out the door or whatever else. And I think that's probably my favourite bit of the job.
Katie, what about you?
Yeah, I think mine's probably very similar, to be honest, but maybe more slightly the team aspect. Like I love the fact that we all work as a team. There's so many of us that have our small little roles, and we all have to come together to make it work. And we run a very tight time schedule, and we very much rely on the people around us to do their jobs to help us do ours. And Juliet's right, it's so rewarding when you come out of like the winter and it's been sort of the longer hours and days from engine build season, and you come out and you see it on the track and you go, I helped contribute to that. And it's a real sort of sense of pride, and knowing that you all pulled together to do that, it does feel really good. And I think that's sort of an aspect of the job that you don't find in many other places, because at the end of the day we are a sports team as well as an engineering company. So I've really enjoyed that aspect.
Brilliant. And I mean, sort of kind of coming off that, I mean, you may have the same answer. What sort of been like a standout memory for you, or like your personal like biggest achievement in your job? I mean, do you want to go first, Juliet, again?
That's a difficult question.
Testing you now.
I know. I think my biggest achievement is just being here. I know that sounds a bit of a weak answer, but I think I worked so hard to get into F1, and I didn't quite take the straightforward route that maybe I was hoping for, or that a lot of people seem to expect. And I think just getting to this position, I'm a manager within the business, which has taken a lot of work to sort of build up to that point. And I think that's probably the thing that I'm most proud of. I think sort of in terms of standout moments, there's an awful lot of standout moments that I feel sort of privileged to have been able to be a part of. Raising the glass when you win world championships and things like that are memories that you hold. You can't sort of escape those, and seeing that sort of sense of, as Kate was saying, sort of that pride and achievement is a huge moment, and it's why we do what we do. I'm a big F1 fan, and I'm here to win. I want to go racing and I want to win, and that feels amazing when it happens.
Brilliant. And Katie, what about you?
I'd say it's maybe, I don't know, it's a hard one. I think for me it's getting to a position that I maybe never thought when I was younger I would. I'm quite the character who sort of doubts their ability, and I always think, I don't know if I can do it. And going from sort of starting on my graduate scheme where you're rotating and you have that sort of pressure, will I end up getting a permanent role? Will I end up where I want, like in the department I want? And you eventually manage it, and then you sort of like start growing, and I've moved up from product confirmation to power unit confirmation, and I'm now running dynos, and that's a place that I thought maybe 3 years ago I didn't even think I'd be able to manage it. So it's just sort of a personal, like a being proud of where I've ended up, and maybe it's a bit selfish, but I'm definitely proud of it, and it's nice to see, and hopefully we'll keep on going up. Who knows?
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, absolutely. Both of those sound like incredible things to be proud of, and you absolutely should be. So just sort of moving on a little bit, obviously both of you have that kind of slightly different roles. Are you sort of based mainly in the factory, or do you get to go trackside? And I mean, if so, which one do you sort of prefer? Katie, do you want to go first this time?
Yeah, so I'm currently completely factory based. It's my goal to go trackside, but I'm still learning and I'm still training, so I'm definitely a few years off that, but that's the goal. And I'm excited for when that day comes, but I'm also loving the process as I'm getting there. So that's me. Yeah.
And Juliet?
So I'm completely factory based, and although there are sort of some opportunities for program management to be a bit more trackside, I think at the moment where I am, I'm happy to be factory based. I think I get to see some of I enjoy that area and aspect of the job. So so I've never been trackside, so I've always been factory based as well. So
great. So do you sort of find, obviously because you are both sort of factory based and you work in factories a lot, do you find that you're actually ending up in a male dominated workplace? I know you mentioned it a bit about the uni, but if you bring it to like the actual workplace, and do you ever have any problems being a female engineer? Do you ever feel like a bit uncomfortable? Just really passing this over to you to sort of hear your first-hand experiences. Juliet, do you want to go first this time?
So I think when I first started here, I think I was maybe surprised at how many women there were here. Coming from where I'd been working before, there was a lot less women. And even now, a lot of the meetings that I'm in, I'm still sort of the only woman in the room on occasion. And that, although that maybe affected me a little bit when I was younger, I don't really notice it anymore from that perspective. If I am the only woman in the room, I think as well, the more time that progresses here and the more time that goes by, I've seen more and more women come into the business as well, which I think is really great to see. We've got a lot of young talent coming in now, which again is fantastic. And hopefully we're sort of changing that going forward with things like this. And I think, yes, sometimes you do have problems or things that you just never realised would be an issue. Again, going from sort of that all-female environment to an all-male environment to then sort of a workplace all-male environment is different. I think it's difficult to put it into words. I have always felt welcome. I've never sort of worked in a place. I've never felt like I didn't belong here, or I shouldn't be here. That's certainly never something that I've had. And I've always sort of been treated with respect. It takes a lot to get into this business, and once you're here, people sort of have taken it on board that you deserve to be here, for want of sort of a better turn of phrase. So I think it's really, really silly things that you realise that is still a problem. And Katie might completely disagree with me here, but really simple things like workwear. All of our workwear is sort of a unisex workwear, which is absolutely fine, but some of it doesn't fit fantastically well. And I think it's just really simple, tiny things like that it never even passes your mind that might be an issue, and then you come in and find out that that your jumpers doesn't fit you quite like you probably buy from the shop or something.
And Katie, what about you?
Yeah, I'd absolutely echo what Juliet said. I haven't had any problems, and certainly HPP and I think all sort of engineering companies and Formula One teams sort of just mirror what's at university. It's sort of the similar split from course to coming here. And I found that people are really willing to listen to your experience. So I think there's two girls in my department. I'm one of them out of sort of 12, and everyone's quite willing to listen to my experience. And if I have, I don't know, anything that I want to say about my experience as a female, people are very willing to go, oh, I didn't realize that maybe you saw it that way, or I see things this way, or that we might have a slightly different way of looking at problems or how we perceive comments here and there. So I've never had any problems, but yeah, everyone's been really good about it, and the first step is sort of educating people. So if someone doesn't know that maybe you shouldn't say that, it might offend this person, then you just got to say, and they go, oh, sorry, I didn't know. But if they didn't know, then how would they, you've just got to say.
Yeah, and to be fair, it's actually sort of really nice to hear that both of you, obviously from working, for Mercedes, that it is sort of becoming a lot more equal. And also the fact that just because you're a woman does not mean that you can't do exactly the same job, and people listen to you. And I think, to be fair, there's still probably a certain amount of the stigma around it. From the outside looking in, you wouldn't necessarily think, well, you probably would assume that it's more of a male dominated environment, but to sort of hear it from you guys that you're actually living in that, and there's absolutely no problem at all, and it's all coming across really well, is I think it's definitely great to hear that that the whole society is moving forward. That's absolutely fantastic. So did you sort of have any obstacles sort of to getting to where you are now, and was there a point that you didn't think that you were going to end up where you are, and if so, how did you get through that? Do you want to go first this time, Katie?
Yeah, I would say my hardest sort of step in the whole process of getting into Formula One was the sort of stage of applying for grad jobs. I remember when I was applying, I was studying at uni, so again, that's another thing that's it's hard to then fit around applying for jobs and interviews and stuff. I remember I applied for over 40 jobs, and I thought there's no way. I just kept getting shot down, wasn't getting past the assessment centre, wasn't getting past whatever stage it was, and it was really, really disheartening. And it wasn't me who was the only person who was feeling like that. I remember all my friends were feeling like that, and it's because there's so many people that apply for those roles. It's so competitive, and it's just a numbers game for some of it. So it was really disheartening, but I eventually got this role. And then from then onwards, it was a lot easier because the pool they were pulling from was smaller. So I would just say, if anyone else has that sort of similar experience, you're applying for jobs, you're finding it really hard, it does get easier, and it is hard, and there's nothing wrong with sort of feeling a bit rubbish about getting declined. It is hard, and we've all been there, but it does get better. I say that was the biggest challenge, and yeah, there's a lot of pressure at that stage as well.
No, definitely. And Juliet, what about you?
Yeah, I'd probably say that my obstacle was probably very similar. I think in my final year of university, it was such hard work just trying to find the time to apply for jobs. Sometimes it felt like I had to pick between doing well in my degree or applying for the jobs, and that's sort of where I ended up backing off from some of the grad job applications and sort of saying, no, I'll wait. I'll wait for the next round. I can't do both of these at the same time. I'd certainly say that was one of the biggest obstacles. I think what I've not said before is that after my first placement here at HPP, when I went off to do my graduate scheme elsewhere, I then applied for a job here another 4 or 5 times, and often I wasn't even getting sort of a response. I wasn't getting a call back. So although I sort of said, I got a job here, and then suddenly I got a job back at HPP, that certainly wasn't a straightforward as I've made it sound. I think in total I applied 7 times to work at HPP, and I got sort of two jobs. One sort of at my short-term internship, and then sort of the permanent job at the end of it. So I think there are obstacles out there, and as Kate was saying, it can get to the point where you sort of feel like, what am I doing this for? I'm going to keep getting pushed back, and it is really important just to keep trying, just to keep sort of regroup, refocus on what it is that you actually want to do, and if it is the thing that you want to do, then just keep going for it.
Yeah, no, definitely. It almost sounds like the difficult bit is actually getting in there in the first place, which has probably got to be reassuring for some people who may be going through similar things and finding it really, really hard. But it must be nice for them to hear that it does get easier, and that once you're in there, it's a lot more straightforward. So sort of bouncing off that a little bit, in your actual job at the moment, do you find that there's a lot of pressure from working in an F1 team? And is it something that you guys sort of are aware of, or does it not really affect you guys that much?
I think from my side, there is pressure. It's a pressurized environment in terms of timeline. We go, race 1 happens whether we're ready for it or not, and just the pressure of trying to make sure that we are ready for it is present. I think a lot of my pressure actually comes from myself. I am the kind of person who wants to do well, and I tend to focus that on myself and making sure that am I working hard enough? Am I doing enough? Am I pushing hard enough on my own side to make sure that as Kate was saying, it's a huge team effort, and I would hate to let anybody down. So I'm always there working hard and trying to push hard, and that probably adds a lot of pressure to myself. But then in the same way, we are a team, and we win together, we lose together. That's your day-to-day business, is just your teamwork. So I think that helps a lot in terms of dealing with that pressure, is that you're all pushing for the same goal.
Yeah, definitely. And Katie, what about you? Is it sort of similar again, or is it different?
Yeah, I don't think I could have put it any better. It is pressurized because the dates don't move. We have to stick to those dates. But I think there's something quite enjoyable about it being a pressurized atmosphere, because when you do your job and you've completed that task, or you've done this earlier, done whatever it was you had to do, there's a real sense of achievement from achieving that. And Juliet's right, that it's such a team atmosphere as well, that even though it is pressurized, I don't think it never feels too much, because you have everyone around you and they're under the same pressures and they're under the same goals. So you've also got that support system of like having everyone there that you can sort of talk to. But yeah, I think it is pressurized, but I really love that atmosphere.
Yeah, definitely. So we've got a few minutes left. So I will just answer a couple of questions in the Q&A, because I know there are a few and I want to try and get through them. So would you recommend to apply to an F1 team first, or a lower team, for example, an F2 or F3, and work yourself up? What would be your sort of recommendation? I don't know. Which of you wants to go first?
I would say there isn't a right or a wrong at all. I would say apply for both and see what you get. There's definitely benefits to both sides. Doing sort of any lower level motorsport or smaller teams, because they are smaller organizations, you would end up doing sort of probably a wider role, so you might gain wider experience from doing that, which can be super valuable. And you can also gain the sort of trackside experience with less professional experience. So I think it depends what you want to go into and what you want from your role. There's certainly like no right or wrong answer. I have friends and colleagues that have done either way, and have loved both. So.
And Juliet, do you want to come in on this one?
I think I'd just echo what Kate was saying, apply for both. There's no harm in applying for both. And as Kate again was saying, choose what it is that you really want to do and are interested in. If it is the trackside things, as Kate was saying, maybe the lower levels is where you prefer to start out to get more of that broader range of experience, but certainly don't let it stop you from from applying for the F1 jobs.
Yeah. And so another one we've got here is, obviously since COVID, there's a lot more sort of remote and hybrid working, which become more common. Do any of the undergraduate placements offer a hybrid working option for people who can't relocate or live more than 2 hours from sort of a base, or at other levels as well? Maybe if it's not just placement level, what would be your sort of suggestion on this?
From my side, COVID was a strange time, and we were on site throughout. So although we did do a little bit of hybrid working, we are now sort of almost 100% of us are back on site full time. There are some sort of mixed working, but that's certainly not the norm. We're much more into sort of remote calls and things like that, so we're not all sat in a meeting room or stood in a meeting room. But in terms of sort of that as a big career option, it's not something that I'm that aware of. Katie might disagree with me and know of something else, but from my perspective, it's, as I said, it's such a team effort. We do tend to have more of it on site and face to face.
Yeah, I would say the same as Juliet. I certainly couldn't do my role remotely, and I know there's a lot of roles like that in the factory.
Yeah, I think it's probably one of those jobs where it's quite difficult to not do it on site.
Yeah.
We just have one last question just to finish off, and that is, what would be your biggest piece of advice for someone who's either thinking about becoming an engineer, or maybe it's something that they're starting to consider? What would be your biggest piece of advice for them going forward? Katie, do you want to go first? Or Juliet, if you're ready?
My biggest piece of advice would be just to go for it, to take every opportunity that you have, and also to try and make yourself as many opportunities as you can. There's no harm in sending an email. There's no harm in writing a letter. There's no harm in trying something. Just throw yourself out there and just do the best that you can do, and it will come for you eventually. Sometimes it just takes more time.
I think I would echo Katie similarly. It's just probably my biggest piece of advice is just to don't give up. If it's something that you really want to do, then just keep going for it. You will get knocked back time after time, and Engineering isn't an easy degree, and working in F1 isn't an easy job. There are plenty of easier jobs out there. So don't be disheartened if you get that pushback, and don't be disheartened if you're finding it difficult. If you're finding your degree difficult, I don't know many people who found their engineering degree easy. And just to keep going and keep pushing, but to make sure that you're enjoying yourself. I am incredibly fortunate that I get to do a job that I love every day, and I get to do something that I'm very passionate about, and not everybody has that opportunity, for which I'm incredibly grateful. But for me, I wouldn't be doing this job if I wasn't that passionate about it and if I didn't love it as much, because as I've said, there are so many jobs out there, and to just make sure that it's doing the right thing for you, and it's exactly what you want and it's making you happy.
Brilliant. Well, I have to say that is some fantastic advice, ladies, and that's a great way to sort of bring this webinar to a close. I'd like to start with saying a massive thank you to both Katy and Juliet for giving up their time this evening. It has been super chatting with you, and I have to say I've absolutely loved it. Thank you to all of you guys for watching as well. I hope that you've enjoyed it. I'm sorry I couldn't get through all of the questions. There were quite a few, but I hope that we've sort of given you as much of an idea and as much information as we can. And again, a massive thank you to Girls on Track UK and Motorsport UK for making this event possible. Anyone who's not already a Girls on Track UK community member, our community is totally free to join. I actually now have over 6,500 members. We'd love you to join us if you're not joined already. The link will be going into the chat function in a moment. So you can also sign up to our mailing list on there as well. Once this webinar has finished, there will be a link to a quick survey, which we'd love for you to complete, as it helps us to know what our members want in the future. So please take a few notes to complete this once the call has ended. And remember to keep an eye out in your inbox for upcoming events and any exciting competitions. Finally, thank you so much, you two. It's been absolutely brilliant talking to you. I have to say, it's been a great way to spend my evening. Hope you all have a very Merry Christmas, and we'll hopefully see you all in the new year.